So now Pokemon Sword and Shield has been officially released, and I wasn't really planning on doing any form of review or anything, but seeing as all of the backlash that Sword and Shield has been facing since E3, I feel like now there's probably a fair amount of people that are on the fence in regards to this game. So now that I've finished it, I want to throw in a couple of my cents to hopefully get people to either go to one side of the fence or the other about whether or not they want to play the game or skip it. So that's what I'm going to be doing today. I'm no professional reviewer by any regard, so you're going to have to take what I say with a grain of salt. I might not know what I'm talking about in certain regards, but I'm basically just going to be going through this and talking about the things that I found interesting, the things I didn't find all that interesting, and yeah, that's pretty much it. And before I go in, I'm not trying to sway one way or the other. For the people that are upset about the games and are wishing to skip this one, I'm not looking to sell you on this. I'm not trying to force anybody to buy the game if they don't have any desire to. This is simply to give my own review in hopes that maybe the people that are just on the fence will have a decision or come to a decision for some reason based on my opinion. So, with all that said, let's just get right into it. The game starts with an introduction to the region and the champion, Leon. And then from there, you get to meet your character and your friend, neighbor, and rival, Hop, who is the brother of the current champion of Galar. And boy, does he let you know that. Hop's dream is to eventually become a Pokemon trainer that is better than his brother and be able to beat his brother at a champion battle. His brother being the champion that has been undefeated, and so he wishes to be the first trainer to defeat his brother in a battle. And boy, does he tell you that this is his plan. Not too long in, you actually get to meet Leon, and he is the one that gives you your starter Pokemon. He brings forth the starters of this region, which are Grookey, Scorbunny, and Sobble. And personally, I chose Scorbunny because I just love his design, and I was just praying the whole way through that he didn't end up being firefighting. And then from there, you have to battle hop in the, standard just rival first battle. And then from there, after it's over, the game just sort of starts and you can explore into the world of the Galar region and experience some of the things that have been changed in this game, with specifically being the wild area, which I will cover a bit more later on. But the first big change that you'll see immediately after this is they talk about what's called the gym challenge. So as opposed to other games where you go from route to route, town to town, and challenging all the gym leaders, and it's seen as this thing that just every trainer in the region does, in the Galar region, it's actually done differently, and in fact, most trainers don't even bother to do gyms. And it's even mentioned several times that most trainers actually quit before they even get the third badge. And that's actually pretty interesting. They don't really ever talk about that in other games where it's just you hear about trainer just giving up or not getting all the badges. It just sort of seemed like every trainer that's, turns 10 just eventually goes and challenges all the gyms, but it seems to not be the case here. And before you can even start the gym challenge, you have to actually get endorsed. So you basically have to get a letter of recommendation to be able to compete. Then from there, you sign up, register, and then get a trainer number that you actually get to assign. And I didn't go with 666 or 420 or 69 like the rest of the internet because that's low hanging fruit. From there, you explore around the Galar region and you take on gyms. And this time, it has a little bit of a different thing before you can actually challenge the gym leader. It's sort of similar to the past games where there's like some puzzle or whatnot, but they call it a gym mission, where you have to clear the mission before you can even get to the gym leader themselves. And then once you beat the mission, you get to challenge the gym leader in a big stadium that they've shown off in the trailers and whatnot. And this is actually where I found a nice little detail that's actually pretty cool to see, and that is when you start a gym battle, it goes from the cutscene of your character meeting the gym leader straight into the battle through a seamless transition, and I thought that was really cool to see instead of a just a fade transition or even the same transition used for the normal battles themselves. But now that I'm talking about battles a bit, I kind of have to talk about the elephant in the room, and that's the models and animations. In case you don't know and have been avoiding any information regarding Sword and Shield since E3, during their event, the director of the game, Junichi Masuda, stated that the game wouldn't have all the Pokemon, and in fact that they were dropping a chunk of them to instead focus on the quality of the game graphically and with the animations and so on and so forth. And since then, there's been all this footage that shows the game, and people have noticed that the animations look basically the same. And are they the same in the final game? Yeah, they're pretty much the same. The one thing that they do add, though, is a lot of the Pokemon have interactions that result in these battle animations. And that may seem a little weird, and it's kind of hard to explain. But rather than in past games where, say, like a tackle has just had your Pokemon's model move forward or whatever, a lot of the Pokemon have interactions that result in those simple animations that you see repeated from time to time. The animations are recycled, yeah, but there's a little bit more character to each Pokemon that allows some form of, character to come through and show off what each Pokemon can do. And then, everything's recycled. As it comes to the models, I don't know a whole lot. There was talks back during the development of X and Y where apparently all the models were created and then future proofed, which I'd imagine probably just means that the models were of high quality at the time and then downscaled, but I have no idea. So if you're wondering if the things are reused, well, yeah, they are. And personally, I really don't mind it, but I understand why people would be dissatisfied with this, especially when it came to the answer Masuda gave about the Pokemon being cut for this very reason. So I'm not going to say that the people that are upset about it aren't justified in their response. I'm just saying personally, I don't really mind the reused animation. I actually appreciate the fact they've added a bit more character to it, but I understand people's distaste for the reusing of the animations. So now let's talk about the wild area, the big addition to this game. In the Galar region, there's a big open area that is surprisingly not as vast as I thought it would be, but there's just one huge area in the game where you can go around and explore and see Pokemon that appear on the field and participate in the max raid battles. And this area is actually pretty cool to see for the first time until you connect to the internet where the frame rate kind of drops. And it's a little bit justified because they have the all the players that are actively playing as well. Of course, not all of them, but when you connect online and go into the wild area, it loads a bunch of players, and that causes the frame rate to drop dramatically. Especially if there's weather, like it's raining or there's a thunderstorm, the frame rate will drop, and that's like kind of kind of noticeable, like really noticeable. But if you aren't connected to the internet, it's not going to drop as much. The wild area is made up of a bunch of extra little sections of it that all have their own different appearance rates, and that's also determined by the weather. So if you go to a spot on the map and there isn't a Pokemon you like, chances are it might show up later when there's a different weather condition in the area. Some Pokemon only show up when it's raining, some only show up when it's foggy, some don't show up unless there's sunlight, and then and then there's even some that don't even appear with like less than a 1% chance with a certain form of weather. And just about every section of the wild area has a different encounter rate for each of the Pokemon, and which is also again based on the weather. So there's a lot of things you can do and a lot of things to check out when it comes to the wild area. That and the max raid battles. The max raid battles are basically the Dynamax fights in this game. Aside from the gyms where you can normally Dynamax on your own, the max raid battles are against purely Dynamax Pokemon or Gigantamax Pokemon if you're playing early at launch and rare appearances after that. The max raid battles are done either with yourself and random players, or your friends can join you and give a helping hand and actually choose Pokemon that are relevant to the fight and can actually help. Once a Dynamax Pokemon in the max raid battle is defeated, you are given the chance to catch it. And I'm actually kind of surprised that the catch rate, at least for these, seems to be pretty easy. I've yet to fail a catch on a max raid battle, and I've heard people say you can fail them, but I haven't failed a single one. And then when you complete the max raid battle, you get the Pokemon if you catch it, and you're also given a handful of items. These items can range from experience candy, which are candy that just give experience points, and then you can also get TMs. but these aren't the TMs you're expecting. These are called TRs, and they function very similar to the classic TMs where they are one use only. Once a TR is used, it breaks and you can't use it anymore. Where the game still has the normal TMs where they follow the same rules as X and Y, where you can just infinitely use them once you have them. I would actually suggest if you want the game to be a bit of a challenge, I would avoid participating in a bunch of max raids prior to a lot of the gyms, because the EXP candy you get from doing max raid battles actually cuts down on a lot of the grinding that you would be doing. It makes it easier to get higher level teams for sure, but it cuts out a lot of the challenge where you're not really going to be, at a corner when it comes to a lot of the battles. So if you want an easier time, you can participate in these max raid battles. Or if you want the game to be a challenge, I would advise against actively participating in the raids. Now that I've mentioned difficulty, I'm going to talk a bit about the core game itself. I'm going to avoid any spoilers, and in fact the footage you're watching in this video is of my own recording, and I'm actively avoiding showing any late game footage for the very reason of not spoiling anything. But basically, the game is actually fairly challenging, to a degree. Around the later parts of the game, the challenge sort of starts to decline a little bit, where the trainers stop having a huge gap in the levels, but it sort of makes up for it with the variety of Pokemon you can catch. So while the game stops being a real challenge, at least in my opinion, it stopped being a real challenge at the later parts, there was a lot more for you to experience with the Pokemon themselves. As for the story, again, I'm not really going to talk any spoilers. The overall story talks about how the Galar region is experiencing the Dynamax phenomenon, and they're researching it to figure out what exactly causes Dynamax and how its connection to an ancient story from the past about two heroes that used Dynamax to protect the Galar region. So the story focuses on trying to learn what exactly the Dynamax phenomenon is, what this historical event really meant, and what actually happened, and how it ties to the future of the region. And from there, it sort of progresses into learning more about that, culminating in figuring it out, basically. But again, I won't spoil anything, so if you're curious about that, you'll have to actually play it. But as for my own review of what the story is, I actually kind of liked it until like around the middle part of the game where the story just sort of takes a backseat to nothing. The story exists at the beginning where they're explaining everything to you. Then near the middle of the game when you're like still between like badge 4 and like 7, the game just sort of doesn't really do anything with the story, and then at the end it just sort of all just forces the climax at the just forces it at you. Suddenly you go from having no story and just like bits and pieces of it to suddenly now you're at the climax of it. That I didn't really care for. I feel like they could have done a lot better when it came to having the story distributed equally around it, or having a lot more of it be uncovered as you play. It is sort of covered as you progress, but just not as much at all compared to when they first explain it and then the climax. It's like think of it as the start is like an upward trend of the story, and then once you get to like the third gym, then it hits a flat line, and it flatlines until the seventh gym, and then suddenly it just spikes straight up again, and then yeah, that's basically it. The story just sort of sits there, and then once you get to the climax, then you're just thrusted into it, and then it's like, all right, we got everything figured out. This is it. So there was certainly ways they could have done better with this, but overall, I kind of liked it just for how it ended and the overall story behind it. The story of Sword and Shield kind of reminded me of the story of X and Y, and I kind of liked the story of X and Y as well, even though that also was sort of not the greatest and not the most well done. It sort of reminded me of that, where there's a historical significance to things that are happening in the region, and that was something that I thought was really cool to see. But it all sort of just takes a back seat after like the first couple hours of the game, and then only returns at the last few. So what do I think of the Galar region itself? There's actually quite a bit to see and a lot of different environments around the region itself. It's based off the UK, and I've never traveled outside the US and haven't really seen anything of the UK, so I have no idea. But I know of a couple friends that are there, and they say that it does a decent representation of the country itself. And the environments and the places you go to are pretty varied, and there's some nice environments around the world. There's some cool places to visit, from mountaintops to caves to mines to snowy peaks, sort of the same stuff you would expect most Pokemon regions to have, but it does it with a sort of English flair to it and represents the UK in more ways than just the English, well, the UK English text, that is. You'll see the typical stuff like mum and things like that, and British slang that's to be expected in the translation. So, overall, what did I think of Pokemon Sword and Shield? I think the game was really enjoyable. The recycled animations and models personally didn't really bother me, so that didn't really hamper my experience of the battles themselves. The new Pokemon's designs are really fun and unique, and I like a lot of them. My team, for the most part, ended up being mostly new Pokemon, with like one or two of my favorite from the past generations that still stayed in the game themselves. The story was good until it took a backseat for a long time. The environments were really cool. I liked the wilds areas. That was a really fun addition, and having this sort of open world aspect to the game. The max raids are cool. I'm actually personally a big fan of things that they've done with since X and Y, where you can completely customize your character. I've spent more money customizing my character in Sword and Shield than on any other resource. The difficulty is kind of there. It's not like the hardest Pokemon game, though I will say near the end it gets a little bit, well, it's hard to explain without really spoiling it, but the end sort of hits a weird point when it comes to the difficulty. So it's not incredibly difficult. So if you're looking for a challenge, as I'm not sure what you would expect from a Pokemon game that's not really challenging, especially because experience share is essentially forced in this game, which was another thing people didn't like. But believe it or not, the experience share doesn't actually affect everything. The experience isn't fairly distributed, so not every Pokemon gets the same amount. It is still based on participation. So if a Pokemon doesn't participate, it's not going to gain nearly as much. So if that was something you're worried about, I should have mentioned that during battles, but whatever. But overall, I enjoyed my experience with Pokemon Sword and Shield. If I had to put a number on it, I would give it an 8 out of 10, with the only things holding it back being the story taking a backseat for a long time, the difficulty kind of taking a backseat and just sort of fluctuating near the end, the not all the Pokemon being in there, which to me hasn't been a big deal because I go into every game with a fresh slate and I don't bring anything with me. But there, it would have been nice to have everything. And the last thing that would hold it up would probably be some of the performance issues that the game suffers from. If you're connected to the internet, and there's a lot of performance issues, especially in the wild areas where you'll see it the most. But in other sections of the game, the frame rate will drop if you're connected to the internet and actually playing with other people. The performance will take a bit of a hit as a result of that. So would I recommend Sword and Shield if you're on the fence? I would say it depends on what it is that you're on the fence about. This is the most polarizing Pokemon game I feel like since probably Black and White. So if you're on the fence in regards to recycled animation and being upset that Game Freak didn't put more of an effort into it, chances are you're not going to find a lot of fun in seeing the same recycled stuff. So it probably will be exactly what you're expecting to go into it. If you're not looking into it because of the Pokedex numbers, you'd actually be surprised just how much is actually still in the game. And I would suggest giving it a shot purely with the same way I do it and playing with a clean slate. I understand people like to carry their favorites along with them, and that's fine, but I would say the Pokedex numbers probably isn't a real good reason to be on the fence. There may be some of your favorites excluded, however, there's probably a lot of new favorites that you could find in the Galar region. But yeah, overall, I would recommend Sword and Shield to a longtime Pokemon fan. Regardless of what reason you may be on the fence about, it might be something still worth looking into, even if you don't pick it up brand new, as I've seen some of the people that are not in favor of the games talking about getting it used. I would still recommend you give it a shot, either by playing it from someone else or playing it used. It's still a fun time in its own right and enjoyable as something completely different and, well, so different and the same because it's still Pokemon and it's still the same stuff you've seen from the last few years. However, some of the changes to this game in the Galar region are unique enough and enjoyable enough to sort of not forgive Game Freak in a sense, but to sort of be okay with some of the cuts that they made. And that's just my own opinion. I'd like to hear what you guys think of Sword and Shield. So if you've played it, I would like to hear your thoughts. Share some of your things that you liked and disliked in the comments. And I'd actually like to know if there are people watching this that are either on the fence or are against the game. I actually want to hear your thoughts as well. I want to know why you're still on the fence and the people that are against it. I want to hear some of your thoughts in regards to the game after seeing it, be it my video or live streams. I want to hear what you have to say about it, though I do respectfully ask that you do not try to argue and fight. This is for all sides. Please refrain from arguing and fighting each other in the comments or throwing insults. There's no reason for any of that. So yeah, that is it. I appreciate everyone for watching this video. This is a pretty long video. So I want to thank everyone for watching, and I will see you all next time.